And Darkness on the Edge of Town, I think, is a record about anger.
It was a darker album. It's a lot more somber. He was pushing 30. It was a lot more reflective. It was a lot more introspective. And yet it had this incredible sort of... He somehow managed to combine that sort of introspection and reflection with that very sort of big rock and roll sound. I mean, there are a lot of real concert favourites that stayed in his set for years, like Promised Land, Badlands, Dance on the Edge of Town, Racing in the Streets. I mean, they all came from that one album, and they all managed to sound, you know, live. They sounded fantastic.
It was more fun than Born to Run. You know, Born to Run was really hard. You know, Darkness was it took a long time, but it was not. We recorded a lot of songs, recorded about 30 songs, and what would happen is I'd write a song, and then I'd write like 4 songs, and they would be a progression up. And the 5th song, well, that would be like song number 2 on the album, and then I'd like write 4 more, and like the 9th song, then I'd be at a place where that was like the 3rd song on the album. And meanwhile, all these other songs, they'd be like transitional material, you know, to help you get to a particular place, you know. And so that's sort of the way the record was done. The actual recording of the songs did not take that long. Like on the record, Darkness on the Edge of Town, that's like all live in the studio, you know. That's vocals and band, everybody's playing live. Streets of Fire is mostly live. Something in the Night, that was a song that we did very first night in the studio. We did it as a demo tape, and that's all live. So like there's like 3 or so things that are like actually mostly live. It did not take no more than 1 or 2 days to record, you know, one day, you know.
Darkness is a record, I think, where you confront the fact that things may not turn out the way you want them to, and coming to terms with that. Springsteen doesn't sort of turn this into an indictment of America. You know, this is not really a God Save the Queen moment. It's more a sense that you know, life is big and difficult and throws stuff at you that you can't necessarily handle, and things are not necessarily going to turn out the way you want them to, and it's not even clear why. And you have to sort of come to terms with that. That's why you have a song like, you know, Adam Raised a Cain, where you sort of come to terms with your patrimony, you know, or you come to terms with things like evil, you know, on a song like Prove It All Night. So, you know, in some ways, Darkness on the Edge of Town is really the crossroads of Springsteen's career, where he realizes that, you know, happy endings are not something you can take for granted in art or life.
Some, however, were not convinced by Springsteen's newfound introspection and melancholy.
Albert Murray said a great thing about the blues. He says the blues is not a way of, it's not the way black people express their pain. It's a way they transcend their pain. On Darkness at the Edge of Town, I don't think there's quite enough of the transcendence. That's the way I feel about it.
The album, nevertheless, proved to be a commercial success, and by the end of the year, Springsteen's professional difficulties were seemingly at an end when John Landau officially signed up as the singer's manager. In 1979, Springsteen returned to the studio, but with greater artistic control came a new perfectionism, and Springsteen would be working on this opus for over a year.
I think it's interesting. I mean, somebody once said that he is the Stanley Kubrick of rock and roll. I mean, there's this painstaking perfection. And when I interviewed him, at the end of the interview, we were talking, I said, any regrets? And he said, yeah. He said, the one thing, I wish I put out more records. He really, I think he knew that this perfectionism was actually really, you know, he was taking too long making records. I think in mitigation, I mean, you know, yes, it was a couple of years between Darkness and The River, but I mean, the guy was working his bollocks off. I mean, he was, you know, you look at the itineraries for the tours between Darkness on the Edge of Town and The River, and he working really hard. And this wasn't sort of, you know, a sort of 35-minute greatest hit show, you know, hi, great to be back in Pasadena, come back, 50-minute encore and gone. I mean, this was like, you know, 3-4 hour shows. And I mean, you know, you see footage of him from that time. I mean, he was losing 5-10 pounds a night on stage, just sweating, you know. He was working really, really hard. So I think in fairness, you know, he could take his time making records.
It was October 1980 when the new record was finally unveiled to an eager audience. The River, a multifaceted double album, again displayed a maturing songwriter, willing to take his time compiling material, many tracks having already been road-tested on audiences since 1979.
He's using the road as a laboratory for many of the songs that end up on the river. And I think that one of the things that's going on is that he's trying to integrate different parts of himself, not only in terms of, trying out the music live that's going to end up on the record, but also ending up with a record that has a kind of an emotional texture and a kind of variegated quality that really hasn't been the case in a lot of earlier Springsteen records. I mean, I've said that, that Born to Run is about anxiety and Darkness on the Edge of Town is about anger, but The River really has everything. I mean, it's got the sort of the free-spirited stuff, Sherry Darling, that harkens back to the early work. It's got the sort of more meditative songs like Wreck on the Highway or The Price You Pay. It's got, rockers like Ramrod. It's got sort of tragedies like The River, and this sort of kaleidoscopic quality of the record is really the thing that sort of sets it apart. It happens to be my favorite Springsteen record because it's the most full vision, I think, of American life that you see on any of his records. It's my Desert Island Disc. It's sort of the synecdoche of Springsteen's career.
I think it was a direct response to the darkness on the Edge of Town. And I think the people who'd seen him in concert wanted that element of just a good time rock and roll, which the really uplifting stuff from The River captured. So I think it was Springsteen's attempt to try and make the audience happy by giving them something for everyone.
With the release of the album, Springsteen and the band embarked on an epic tour, characterised by extremely long performances that often incorporated more than 30 songs. In 1981, Springsteen returned to Europe to an ecstatic response. He would find that his distinct American outlook and persona was as embraced in this continent as it was in his own.
Well, I think that, of course, outsiders can perceive your contours better than you yourself can, and I think that's especially true in Springsteen's case. And I think that, England in particular, which has such a long tradition of absorbing American music and appreciating American music perhaps better than Americans themselves can, we're able to sort of see Springsteen's contours in a way that maybe a lot of American audiences couldn't. I think that then and now that Bruce Springsteen is the kind of American that non-Americans like. He represents the more attractive aspects of the American character, the sort of the openness, the relative lack of irony, the sort of a belief in the basic decency of the world. I think these are things that outsiders tend to like about Americans. They sometimes think of it as a kind of innocence, which perhaps it is. But there's something very appealing about that. And Springsteen, I think, much more so than just about any other American rock performer, very clearly embraced this vision of America with alacrity and with an unself-consciousness that was all the more appealing. There was nothing artificial about it. It really was, expressed a kind of essential part of his persona.
In contrast to the lengthy recording of The River, Springsteen's next album was inadvertently recorded at his home in New Jersey. Released in June 1982, Nebraska was Springsteen's first overtly political record, a set of spare acoustic demos initially planned as a template for a full band record. It was decided that it would remain more successful as a solo work, and 10 years on, it realised John Hammond and Mike Appel's initial plans of Springsteen as a singer-songwriter in the mode of Bob Dylan.
One of the things I admire tremendously about Springsteen is that Springsteen has real, somewhat inchoate, political ideals, and that he tries to live by them, that he puts his money and his time and his art where his mouth is again and again and again. I think his integrity is a truly remarkable thing to behold. And that begins with Nebraska. That's where he really is making a statement. Look, I am getting, Yeah, I mean, you want me to do more rock and roll? You want me to do that show on record again? No, no. All right, this other thing is